Hi guys, welcome back to Crafty Quilting Designs. I hope you're having a really great day and everything is going so wonderful for you. So today is Stash Buster 3 for that Scrappy Quilt. So I hope you are up to scratch. And if you are, well done to you. I know it can be a little bit daunting sometimes to get all of those squares together to make those blocks. So give yourself a pat on the back. That's quite an achievement to start making this and making that commitment as well. So today we are going to talk about Sashing'S, borders and cornerstones, or floater borders. So either way, whatever terminology you use, that is what we're going to discuss today. Now we have to decide two things. One, do we keep it as an original Scrappy quilt? And what I mean by that is that do we just stitch all of the blocks together? Okay, now just a little bit for those of you who are new to quilt making or scrappy quilt making. When I say the original form of a scrappy quilt, in the old days, or as I should say, sorry, in historian days, scrappy quilts was just all stitched together. So there were no sashings, there were no borders, etc. And scrappy quilts were more or less born out of old fabrics, old clothing, used clothing, worn clothing, and so it came about from the haves and the haves not. Now those who had finances or extra money to buy, they will buy the actual charms. Now charms was originally for scrappy quilts, and we don't use them for that purpose today because obviously in the modern quilting world it's changed so much. All right, but charms was originally for scrappy quilts, and so obviously the haves not, who could not afford them, would use old clothing, etc., as I've mentioned, and stitch them together to keep the family warm. Whereas the charm squares themselves, they were sample pieces of fabric or sample squares of fabric when the fabric was actually manufactured. So that's how that actually came about. And so with a scrappy quilt, there was no sort of inner borders. So there was no borders between highlighting that particular patchwork of the actual block. There was none of that. So the patchwork was made, and let's say you made 30, you know, all of those charm squares would have been stitched together. All right, and many times with traditional scrappy quilts, you'll find about 2,000 pieces of charm squares in there, and they were never repeated. They were never repeated. All right, so that's what I mean by the original state of a scrappy quilt. So no borders, just all the blocks just stitched together, and then we will put a final binding to capture all of those 3 layers. Now the second objective is that what we need to decide is whether or not we're going to do an inner border or a sashing, and whether or not we're going to do a cornerstone. All right, and then a final border around it. So we need to discuss those things and decide. Now what I have gone ahead and done is laid out a few samples of colors for our Sashing'S and for our inner borders, and it's just to give you some clarity in terms of highlighting the actual blocks. Now me personally, I do not like the original form of a scrappy quilt. Okay, because I just personally feel it is a lot of fabric colors coming back at you, and I'm a modern quilter. I wasn't born in the 18th century. Okay, and I may look young, but I'm not that young. All right, but so for me personally, I don't necessarily like that. I do like the borders in the quilt. I do like framing, especially for the scrappy quilts. I do like framing them. And if you look at my, you know, loving my scrappy quilt, I did frame those as well. All right, but I didn't add any borders. And so I played around with a few ideas and a few colors for my scrappy quilt top. Now your scrappy quilt top is going to look completely different to mine, because obviously we're not using the same pieces of fabric. So what I would advise you to do is to pull from your stash or from your scraps and see what strips of fabric you can use to actually use as your cornerstones or as your inner borders. All right, and which is what I actually did. I had a few strips of fabric that I've cut, and I'm planning to make another scrappy quilt with, so that's what that was pulled for. Now I'm not going to actually use those, but I've put those together so that you can have a collective idea of how to lace yours out. So let me take you over to what I've laid out, and then we can go through explain them. I will then also stitch together the sashing or inner borders onto one of my squares so that you have an idea of how to move forward with it. Now I also played around with the idea of doing half square triangles, or not half square triangles, or hourglass, sorry, my brain just went for a minute, hourglasses for the cornerstones. Now you can use anything for the cornerstones, all right, it's entirely down to you, but and I'll tell you why once I've started explaining to you why I did what I did and why I've chosen not to actually use, you know, a sort of a patched piece cornerstone. Now for those of you again who are new to quilting, if you're unsure what the borders are, so the borders are the final piece of fabric around the quilt top that frames that whole quilt top. When I'm referring to inner borders or sashing, I'm then referring to sashings or strips of fabric that frames the block themselves. All right, so hopefully when I show you how I've some few examples of mine, you have a clear understanding of what I'm referring to. So let's go over to that now, and we will talk about it, and then you can have some ideas on how you want to move forward with building your quilt top. So we're almost there, guys. So well done, as I said, for getting this far. Congratulations, that's really an accomplishment so far, especially if you are new to this. So let's go over now and I will show you what I have come up with. Okay, so here are all the blocks laid out. So I've only laid out 12 together, just to give you an idea of if you decide just to lay them out together and not add a sashing or borders around there, this is what it's going to look like. So remember that you will get your first and secondary patterns if you decide to go this way. So obviously you have your X in the middle there with your aggression block in the middle. Your other pattern you will get is your square on point there as well. And you will get that throughout the entire quilt top once you have stitched it together. And depending on what prominent colors you have actually chosen. Okay, so this is where if you don't decide to, you're not going to use any borders or cornerstones, this is what it's look like. All right, now I have went ahead and prepared a few examples for you so you can have a clear idea of what I'm referring to. So these are two blocks that I've laid out, it's not stitched together, with just some inner borders. Okay, now I did not like this. I just think it was just a little bit too much. And the reason why I'm saying that is because my quilt top will have lots of colors in them, but to add, you know, something as colorful as this, I think is just a little bit too much, personally speaking. There are no cornerstones with this one, so it's just the actual inner borders or your sashings, whatever you refer to them as. All right, some people call them inner borders, some people call them floating borders, some refer to them as sashings. Okay, over here in the corner I went with a purple, and I do like this one actually. It's really nice. I like the way that the solid color has highlighted those blocks. They've really framed them, and it causes you to look at the blocks themselves. Now remember, I have not stitched these on. I've just used strips of fabric that I had from my stash, and then little pieces of scraps of fabric just to highlight it, to give you an idea of what I'm referring to. All right, now the purple does look nice. I think it does show off the blocks themselves beautifully, and the color blends with it. Okay, now I went for a white with this one here, and it's okay. I have to be honest, it's okay. I think the white pushes the blocks forward a little bit too much. I think the white takes over. That's me personally. I do like the black cornerstones on them, but I think personally the white strips of Sashing'S around the block is just a little bit too much for me. I don't know, there's just something about it. I think the white pops out quite a lot, and I think it will take over from the blocks themselves. So I didn't really like this one. All right, there was black as well. Now the black is it's a bit too black. It's just a really dark, strong, deep black color, and I think it takes over. And you know what, I think possibly a smaller strip of black may do it. So if you're going to use a black on yours, I wouldn't go for a 2.5 width strip for your sashing. I would probably go with 1.5 inches. I think a smaller black color will most likely frame it nicely. I think that's what I would say for black, but it's not bad. I just think too much is not good, but little is best. So when I say that, I'm just referring to the size or the width of your actual sashing. Now, before I move on to the next example, let me just say this, that your Sashing'S, yeah, is going to be the length of your actual block. So whatever your block length is, so remember your block should be the same size throughout. So whatever the length is of your block, that is the length of your Sashing'S. All right, so my Sashing'S is going to be 11.5 because my block size is 11.5 squared. Okay, the width of my Sashing'S is going to be 2 inches. That will make the same width for my cornerstones. All right, so that's how it actually works out, but I will do an example of mine and show them to you so that you have a collective idea of how to move forward. Now, I fell in love with the cream. The reason why I fell in love with the cream, yes, I'm going to use black cornerstones. And I think with the cream, it blends in nicely with the quilt top, which is what it's going to be. So for those of you who are new to quilting, once we stitch all of these squares together with our borders or without borders in Cornerstone, it is referred to as a quilt top. All right. I do like the cream. I think it blends beautifully with all of my color palettes that I have. And I have lots of bright colors on my quilt. I have lots of reds. I have lots of bright pinks, as you can see there. And it's really dotted throughout each of the squares. You cannot miss them. And so I think for the white, for that reason as well, I just think the white pops out too much and it's just too bright. The purple, I think, slightly tones it down, but you see a lot of the purple in that particular square. I think you will notice the square purple, sorry, the outline of the blocks being purple before you notice my quilt block patterns, my piecing pattern. And I think you want to highlight that as much as possible because that's where all the effort went into. So I think with the cream, it sort of blends into the background. Everything layers up nicely with the cream. So I'm going to go with the cream for mine with the black cornerstones. So that's where we're at the moment, and we will stitch them together and I will show you an example what it looks like. All right, so this is where we're at right now. So well done again, as I said, for those of you who made it this far. If you are enjoying this video and this Stash Buster series, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I really value your opinion, and I enjoy having to do these videos and, you know, have a little chats with you and hear your feedback. You know what? I would like to know, which one would you actually choose? Really, realistically, would you go with the purple and black? Would you go with the black and white? Would you go with the black Sashing'S and white Cornerstones? Or would you go with the cream Sashing'S and black Cornerstones? Or would you go with Sashing'S, something like this, really colorful and no cornerstones? Or would you just keep it to an original Scrappy quilt, which is nothing is wrong with that. Nothing is wrong with that at all. I just like pushing myself to boundaries and boundaries and seeing what else I can come up with, and I enjoy doing that. All right. Or would you choose to do a half square triangle for your cornerstones, or an hourglass? Would you choose to do an applique rose or something? Because remember, it can be anything you want it to be. It doesn't have to be just an ordinary square for your cornerstone. You can make it into whatever you want. The reason why I chose something as simple as that is because I think so much effort has already gone into the quilt top. I think now it's time to just tone it down and let it all blend together, you know, and leave that other piecing for something else. Because I think if you've got lots going on in the quilt top itself, in terms of all of the piecing and the blocks you've made, I think your efforts are sort of lost with the cornerstones because it wouldn't be seen as much. I think if you have really big block patterns, I think that is when you can show off your cornerstones in doing something really beautiful and piecing it together. That's my objective anyway. So that's how I see it. All right, so let me take you over to the sewing machine now, and I will give you a demonstration of how to start sewing these blocks together with my Sashing'S. Okay guys, before I start giving you an example of how to stitch this together, let me just take you through a few things that I think is very important. Lay your blocks out in the way that you intend to stitch it up together. So I have laid all of my blocks out at this point. So I have 4 across and 5 down, so it comes all the way off the table, as you can see there. All right, and I have laid mine out with the intention of using it or stitching it together using the borders, the floating borders or the inner borders. All right, now one of the things I wanted to point out to you, if you are going to stitch yours together in the traditional way for your Scrappy quilt, just ensure that these points meet very nicely, so you get that actual triangle, you get that square on point there. You want it to meet nicely in the middle there, as you can see it. All right, so just aim for all of them to meet together. So these are 2 separate blocks here, just laid together. All right, so just make sure that it all lines up again there nicely. I will also say do this even though you are adding your sashing. The reason why I am saying this is because when we put that sashing in the middle, we still want these points here to be equated on the other side of that particular sashing, and I will show you once I stitch the sashing together. Okay, so these are just small points that make a huge impact on the actual layout of the quilt. Okay, now let's go over to the cutting board, and I have laid out my cream fabric here, and you need to cut 2-inch strips if that's what you're going to do. So I'm choosing 2 inches because I think that's a good size, because I'm going to lose 1/4 inch on each side. Okay, so make sure that is 2 inch. Now line it up on your actual board. All right, so I'm going to trim it down there so I can have my 2-inch strip. Let me take these. These are my cornerstones that I've already cut into my 2-inch square. So you cut a strip for 2 inches. So I'm going to cut it there to give myself a nice clean cut. To there, so there, to there, to get myself my 2-inch, cut it all the way down, and then cut across into 2 inches squared. All right, if you're doing that for your black cornerstones, but the white is for, sorry, the cream is for my Sashing'S, so I'm just going to cut them into 2 inches strips. All right, just 2 inches width strips. Okay, for the cornerstones, you're going to need 31. Okay, and I suggest that you're going to need the same amount again for the Sashing'S, because the Sashing is going to literally go around each particular square. So get everything cut and ready, and then stacked next to the sewing machine so that you know how you are stitching along and everything is going smoothly. So remember, always get a plan in place. So lay them out, and remember, how you pick them up is how you're going to stitch them. So be very careful and mindful of your process. Right, let's move on to cutting out this, and I will stack them all by the sewing machine and show you what the stitching looks like. Okay guys, so this is what your block, when you are actually putting your block together, you will put your white sashing down at the bottom there, and one there. It really doesn't matter as to which side you start on first, because the block is the same however you turn it. Okay, but you sew one at the top and one at the bottom to start forming those sashings around the actual block. Remember, your sashing is the same length as your block. Okay, all of your sashings the same length as your block. So with the others, you're going to stitch your cornerstone front sides together onto there, and the other side as well onto there, and the other side as well onto there. Okay, so you're stitching the cornerstones on first. Once you stitch the cornerstones on and you have a long strip that includes both, then you will add it to your block itself to create your whole frame around your block. So each block ideally should have 4 cornerstones with the strips. Okay, so at the beginning of the block and at the end of the block should have your strips and cornerstones. And of course you will do the same. So then you would put the other block there, and you would do the same thing throughout. So then you will then add your other strip onto there, the next one onto there, and you will continue. So you could add it on as you go, or you could make it separately, i.e. you will then stitch all of this part to the right on first, and then you will join it onto there once you've done it. But I'll show you physically how that actually works out. But just remember that this is the idea of your block itself. It's quite easy to put together. It's not difficult at all. All right. All right guys, so let me show you how to stitch this block together. What I would say is to have all of your cornerstones next to the machine, as well as the actual strip of fabric. So this is our 2 inch in width by the length of our block. So that's what the measurements you need. So I don't know what your measurements or your blocks are going to be, so whatever they are, just measure them so that you know you have the correct length. Or you can stitch them on and then cut it off. It's entirely as you go. So it's entirely down to you. Right, so the first thing to do to get the block stitched together, take one of your strip of fabric, and you need 2 of your cornerstones, and you can make these collectively, so you can count how much you would need for your actual block and then make them. So it's front sides together, and no need to back stitch. Now obviously I'm using a solid color, so there isn't any front side as such, but if you're using a print, then obviously you know it's front sides together. Make sure they're lined up, and we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam as normal, and sew as as I said, no need to backstitch because we are going to sew the whole blocks together anyway, so I wouldn't bother about backstitching. All right, just make sure that your stitch width is small. Sorry, your stitch length is small. All right, because if you have big stitches, then they will come apart a lot more easily. So if your stitch length is nice and short, it's very likely that your stitches will remain and they wouldn't get loose. So same again. Okay, and finger press it as it comes out, just to make sure it lays nice and flat. Now I'm not going to press the blocks as I make them. I'm literally going to sit here and keep adding on block to each sashing as I go along. Once I've finished with that strip or that row of my blocks, then I will iron those blocks together. So we have 4 rows in total, all right, because it's 4 by 5, because it's 20 blocks I am doing. And so I'm going to make 2 rows, and then I will combine those 2 rows together. All right, and then I'm going to do the other 2 rows and then bring those 2 together. All right, so that's the way I'm going to do it. So hopefully that makes sense to you. It just eliminates the stress of taking the entire quilt top to the ironing board. So if you do it in that step, it's a lot more easier. Now if you have a massive ironing board or somewhere to iron, by all means you can do it in one go. All right, now we've already made this particular one, so the next stage now is to put your sashings at the top of your block, because remember it's going to be the same length, so you shouldn't really be cutting or trimming anything off at the machine. So measure it on, make sure it's nicely laid on there, and you're going to stitch it on, and again front sides, 1/8 seam. Now when you stitch it on your block, make sure you know which side you have laid up, or which sides you need it to be upright or turn, whatever way you've laid it out, make sure you've picked it up correctly. So bring your blocks to the side of you in the way that you want the sashings to be stitched on. Right, so you are putting one at the top of your block and another sashing excuse me, at the bottom. And again, I don't need to measure anything because I've already done my measurements accurately, and it's just to lay on, apply my 1/4 seam, and I'm using my presser foot with this guide, so there's no sort of, you know, guessing, so it's there, easy sewing. Right, so that's done. Get that up. Now you finger press this again. Alright, and the next thing to do now is go back to these, and you're going to lay it front sides down now on the edge of your sashing you just added, because we've increased the size of the block by 2 inches. Alright, so everything should line up, and I again for this particular one here, put the black towards, yeah, towards the black, so fold it towards the black so it doesn't come down like that, so it must be folded towards the black there, and again it goes under. I'm just making sure it lines up. Now if you want to pin, you can go ahead and do that, but I'm okay with this, so I'm not going to bother about pinning. Okay, now what I've done is put it into just right under the pressure foot, and I've anchored it down because I want to make sure I can adjust it as I go before I get started. So once it's anchored down and you know you've set it down correctly, it's all lined up nicely, so I've just put the needle down just to anchor it so I can make sure that the strips lay nice. Okay, and everything, the seam itself lines up there, the seam from the cornerstone is lined up with the seam here. So I know everything is going to be measured nicely. And I'm going to start sewing. Remember, I'm going to tuck it in there because I want it to be under. So I'm going to make sure that goes under because my 1/4" seam has a guide on it. So anything that sticks out, it tends to fold over. So I have to make sure it's tucked under. Again, line that up and continue. Now, once you get going, the blocks don't take long to make it all. They swing through there quite quickly. Okay. Now I'm just going to make sure I sort of tightly pull it down, just to make sure it meets edge to edge there. Okay, and look at that, it meets nicely. So just make sure it's really measured down at the bottom there. Okay, and then you just sew. So just keep checking as you go. So don't just sew mindlessly, just making sure that the cornerstone meets with the block. Okay, now I've just missed it there, and I knew I could have hear the actual it going through both the fabric. It sounded a little bit too quiet because this machine is quiet, but it sounded a little bit too quiet. So somehow I knew something was missed. So I'm going to go back in, and one of the good things, and I'm glad this actually happened. One of the good things about this using the guide is that because you made a mistake, and you can go back now and you can actually see the correction because you get the new stitches, and it tells you immediately I didn't give myself my 1/4" allowance there. So that is going to happen now because I know I can see it really thin there where I missed it. So I'm going to go back where I was at the beginning, well, not right at the beginning, and just see if I can correct everything there. Yeah, and I can actually see where the seam is actually, or the stitches I should say, is actually being corrected now. So I can hear it catching as well. There we go. Right. I don't know if you can see that there, but it definitely has the 2 stitches. All right, so one was the first one was way towards the end of the actual raw edge, and so the other one, now that I've corrected it, was right. So just pay attention to those little things. So it matches up really nicely at the bottom there, so that looks pretty good. All right, so we're going to flip it around now because this edge now becomes the beginning the beginning of our block. All right, so I'm going to switch it around, and we made 2, remember? So you can stack all of these up. So what I usually do, as I said, make a few of them and stack them because you need 2 on each block. So again, I'm going to do the same thing and put it front sides together. I think I'm going to put my glasses on. That's probably why I couldn't see it. When my eyes are tired, it just acts up really. So I'll just put them on there. Yeah, that's better. Look at that. I can see already what I'm doing. Yeah, simply just put my glasses on. It makes life easier. Okay, so stitch this on. There we go. And I'm just making sure it's all nice together. And when I come in close to the end, I just make sure that I just give it a little tug just to make sure it fits in nicely. I'm not stretching it, but I'm making sure it lines up properly. And I'm going to hold it there because I don't want it to be short. Right, now there's no bias on this, to be honest, so everything should be okay. So when you're cutting, make sure you don't cut with using the bias on the strip. Cut opposite towards, when I say opposite, cut opposite the selvage. There you go. Yes, I think I need a little sleep. So let's cut that. Right, lovely. There you go, all stitched on. So this is our this is our block. Okay. Right, so what you need to do now is simply just add the other block on, and you do that, let me just reach for this, you do that by simply adding your Sashing'S to the top there. So again, front sides together. And so. Okay, and then the other one goes on as well, so it really goes by very quickly to stitch it all together. It doesn't take long at all. I mean, we've done literally all of the hard work already with the piecing. This is literally just, you know, doing final touches to make that full top. Okay, so again, finger press that, and what we're going to do is just bring this back out, and again it's lined up pretty nicely there. Look at that, absolutely lovely. Up there's a little bit missed, but down there is beautiful. Okay, and what we're going to do is put it front sides together. So this is a block with the Sashing'S and Cornerstone. All I've added to this one is just the Sashing'S at the top, and I'm going to go and turn this front sides together, lay it up, because remember, all we're doing is increasing this block size by 2 inches. Okay, and just line it up there, and you're going to do the same thing, just continue. So at every junction you're going to add on your cornerstone and your sashing. Again, I'm just going to anchor that down just to make sure I can line it up properly there, make sure everything works, and get my seams there nicely nested, because obviously from the both Sashing'S I can just make sure that lovely, I can see that works well, and it should nest in, sort of fit in together quite easily. Okay, and I'm just going to continue and just keep adjusting as you go. Take your time. Sew it. Okay, so that is what the block will look like. You just trim up any little threads you have sticking out, and so the next thing to do is to continue. So again, you will just simply add on another of your sashing and the end, and then you will continue with this and then add another block. So in total your block should look like this. So all of your rows, one sewn together, should look like this. So the ending, so this is the, let me just show you the start here. So this is how the block started. Okay, I added my sashing, then I added a block, then I added a sashing and cornerstone, then I added another block, then I added another sashing and cornerstone, then I added a block. Okay, and then I added my last block, and then I added my last sashing and cornerstone, and that's what the whole block will look like. I keep saying blocks, but you know, all of the whole rows would look like. So we will have our aggression in the middle, we will have our X. And what I meant about making sure that it was all lined up, so you can clearly see the aggression there, you can clearly see that X in the middle there. Alright, and remember I said to make sure that you get all of these triangles or a square on point together, so that it still looks equated there, so you don't want it too off. Alright, so that's what I meant by that. So just try your best and line everything up so it still looks good. This is a good one. You can actually see that diamond square there, even though the sashing is in the middle. Okay, so let's do that, get all of those completed, and then in our next session we will lay it out, the whole quilt top. We should have it ironed and pressed by then, and then we will discuss whether or not we need to add a final border, or we can simply base the quilt then. Okay, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share this beautiful, lovely session that we have going on, and I hope you're enjoying all of this. So take care, bye for now, and happy quilting. See you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.